please?
Darcy. Chloe.
Sam.
Charlie.
Okay. So we're going to be doing the evaluation, which is learning outcome 4, together as a group. So, first question I'm going to ask you, if you see there, if we're going to talk about the techniques, the processes and techniques that you used to get material. So talking about their effectiveness and which techniques you used and which ones work for you. Who would like to start? Okay, Darcy?
When we started the kind of devising our movement, we looked at a few different practitioners, mainly looking at deviates, pieces, and then frantic, and their methods of how they can create things or techniques they have. So we'd spend time kind of playing around with that and seeing if we can draw anything and like create everything from that.
We used like stimuli as well in terms of like certain scenes. We would think of like anger and things like that would then create small movements, and if we didn't like a movement, even if we didn't like that movement, something came of that as well, even if we had something we liked as well. And also because we got to know our characters quite a lot, we knew how they would react in anger and happiness and all this lot when we had that stimuli.
And I think there's so many other things we created as well that could still be used, like little pieces and things like that.
So just a little side question. How do you record the sort of material as you get it to come back to later on? What do you do?
We like write it all down we either write it down, video it, like notes on our phones and things like that we'll come back to and take photos of it and things like that.
And that'll be the movement what inspired that and the type of thing we did that day as well.
Oh, right, okay.
We also kind of on the lead up to as what Chloe was saying about like how we got to know our characters so well, we spent a lot of time doing kind of drama games, but also exercises. So like we used the Ladies of Letters exercise, which at the time we were using for, it had nothing to do with what we initially ended up with, but I feel like from that it slowly led up to where we got. So we also did the snowball exercise, which was what initially helped us find those characters, and the scenario, which at the time wasn't even really what we thought would end up how we got. But yeah.
Can you remember what the snowball exercise was?
So it entailed us having a piece of paper. We all had our own piece of paper initially, and we would write down a character's name and a brief description of them, and then we would scrunch the piece of paper up and we would each throw it up into the air and would hopefully catch someone else's piece of paper. And then it would kind of be split up into kind of 4 different sections to how many people did the exercise.
We wrote scenarios on it as well.
Yeah, so in these next bits we would have scenarios, and I think there was also like a place as well, so it would be a scenario and then a place where it was set, and that's how we got our setting of a party, because one of these settings was a party. So that's how we kind of combined the characters, and we kind of all thought that the party was kind of the strongest scenario and strongest setting because it was relevant to us almost, and a lot of the character kind of descriptions that were there, we kind of thought that could fit within the scenario of a party.
I think there were a lot of exercises and games that we did that helped us create material, but also there were games that we had material that we didn't use, but from the material that we didn't use, that like triggered other ideas for other things that we did use. So it's just like playing around with all these different like exercise activities and games and stuff that helped us either develop our character, create new performance pieces or whatnot, and like help us figure out stuff that we didn't know about our scenes that we wanted to put in it.
And I think after we haven't done devising movement in a little while, it's almost like being fresh to it again. So I think doing all like the exercises and games got us used to being in the mindset to make all the work and with the movement and the physical theatre sides of it.
Yeah.
As someone who hadn't done devising before properly at all, it was like really interesting to look at the different techniques, especially the snowballing one, because like for me that's the one I understood the most, and but I did notice like from the initial character descriptions we did, they did change a lot from what they were.
Is that a good thing?
I think
I
yeah.
think- yeah, I
I
think
think it really helped us to show that something as little as that can really show you that something as small as like a small stimulus, like an object, for example, could really like develop into a story at the end. And I think that's kind of the push that we needed to help us build up the confidence that we can kind of get a piece going.
I think the snowball gave us our initial characters, but then the more games, activities, and exercises we did, the more our characters developed, and the more we like discovered the relation between each other's characters, like who they really were, and then how they would react in certain situations. And that's how we kind of not strayed from the original characters, but like that's how we developed the character further into something solid.
Yeah,
And I think we were all open to like interpretation and everyone else's ideas and just playing around with things. I think that's one of the most important things that you can have while doing this, because you're not always going to be set on one thing, because it's constantly creating as you're going on. So yeah, with the different things and different inspirations, and something might come in last minute and you might feel so strongly about that, so you want to incorporate it.
I think after we found those characters, like we spent a lot of time doing like improv exercises, and we did like hot seating with our characters, and we did like the 1, 2, 3 improvised game, and that kind of helped us, like Chloe was saying, with getting how we thought our characters would think and stuff, because the more we did it, the more we found that each time there was like a different interaction between the characters, so it was really interesting to kind of see those relationships develop.
And it was cool because we didn't just do that at the beginning of the process, we did it multiple times throughout, just to kind of get a fresh take on how the characters would feel at different points of the story.
And
just
clarify.
Yeah, and just to see if there's anything new that had come from other stuff that we had created. Not to say that we were stuck at any point, but it's just so we'd have a lot of resource to go off of and a lot to play around with.
Hot seating gave us like a point to work from, because it did give us a scene in the end. If you look at the one where
Yeah, it did actually.
We actually kind of used those hot seating as a basis for our piece almost, which we actually eventually used as a concept.
So just a sort of side question, you've talked about working from the stimuli, so just talk me through the commission process. So you started with a point, and then what was the kind of line you got to and where you ended up from that point and where it all went to?
We're given a commission that was set about the bullying and being open about things. And sorry, and your emotions and playing around with stuff like that. And it originally was set for a younger audience, but during the process we realised that some of the things that we wanted to include wouldn't have been quite fitting for the given audience. So ultimately we decided to create this alternate piece that would be for a slightly older audience, as said, just because of the topics, and it's something we could relate to quite strongly, and I know personal experience as well, for a lot of us we put that into it as well.
Our original commission was for depression, anxiety, and how to deal with emotions. So from that we got all together and we spoke about how what the audience would be that we would perform to, what would be relevant to them right now, because we realised that the most interesting thing the things to keep up their interest at most would be to keep it relevant and to their time period now. So we were thinking of social media and the effects of social media at school, the effects of school, cyberbullying, what helplines they have for depression and anxiety, and what may cause depression and anxiety for them and things like that. But then straying from that, as we developed that, we kind of got into these scenes that, yes, we used that as a stimulus, but it kind of strayed from it a little bit. There were our characters are older than the audience that we would have performed it to, but it was still relevant to what could happen in their lives and what could be going on at school and things like that. But then we also got another commission along the way. What was that one? The dementia one, was it?
Yeah, we had another commission for the Dementia Society.
We'd all developed so far.
Yeah, it was something that we, at the time, we thought we could branch off and start devising another piece, but we kind of ended up declining that commission because we felt that we were confident with the commission that we already had and the way it was going, really.
I think because we're so far developed into the commission that we would have already got given, that we wanted to concentrate on that one more than adding on something new. Yeah.
You're taking that up for September. You're going to be doing it in
I was
September.
just about to say that it wasn't like completely declined, it was just putting it back for a later
postponed,
date.
yeah.
Anything you want to add to that about the commission?
Well, when we did start looking at it, we did start using that ladies' letters technique, and we did sort of get some material for that, but it never really went anywhere. But what we did in the end worked out better than that anyway, I think, so.
Yeah.
I mean, ladies and letters really helped us with situations that our audience may be in, because I know that a couple of the stories were like being bullied at school, dealing with sexuality, and it was very much the language that we used in the letters was very much how they would have written it and how the help that they would have got would have applied to it, or whoever replied to it, how they would have.
And I think this is the thing as well with our original given audience. I think we definitely could have gone with that and made a successful piece, but given our age and the ideas we had, it would have created something more impactful. Just because we had gone through this and our experience in it still, it's extremely relevant to us. So it would feel more authentic in a sense.
Yeah, because like there was kind of two different routes that we could have gone down really at that time, and it was we could have either had a piece where we were really kind of educating the audience, but I feel like our piece in the end was a lot more kind of story kind of structured based, but I think in a way that could have worked. It works better in the end, I think, because I feel like people can take their own interpretation of it, and they can take something, each person in the audience could take something from it that's more personal to them, rather than us doing a piece where we're doing like a step-by-step kind of more educational kind of structure where we're panning out all these scenarios and telling them what's kind of right and wrong.
And I found like from my research that companies that do the more physical side or the more artistic side of things, it's a lot more intriguing than when something's just kind of spoken, because it's not something that you're used to and it's something different, so you want to pay attention, and obviously given the relevance of the story you kind of cling on to it a little.
I also feel like as well, by making it more movement based rather than having dialogue in it, that it also gives the audience the creative imagination to have their own opinion on what's happening. Because I felt like although we had very like what the audience, when we had our feedback from the audience, they had it perfect, but also there was things that they added in that we hadn't had there, but also that meant that their imagination had, that's what they saw in it, and I prefer that to us physically saying this is what's happening.
I think.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that's why we enjoy kind of doing movement more, because it's interesting to us as well, getting feedback, hearing what they thought we were doing, because it almost kind of makes us think, okay, that's not what we were trying to get across, but if we wanted to do it like that, then we can take that into consideration, but also in a more positive way, like it kind of makes us feel like that we're showing something the right way, and we can kind of expand on that if we needed to.
And I think with movement-based things as well, it's not that definitive story, whereas you watch it and you understand, okay, this is what's happening, this is who these people are. Whereas because it's more movement-based and there's not really any dialogue in it, it's easier to find your own narrative throughout the story or the piece. So it's a lot easier to apply yourself and find not what you want necessarily, but something more applicable to yourself.
I feel like as well, having it as movement made it, like we were able to still make it educational, like we did struggle with that, but we still made it educational in the sense of like, this is what could be going on at home, like this is what could be happening behind closed doors and you don't know. Like that person who's just slightly off today, this is what might be going on and you don't know. But I think that was really educational in terms of that.
Talking about, you mentioned the physical side of things, you mentioned the techniques you picked up. So do you think there are any specific techniques you picked up from the companies that you talked about
Yes.
that you think, oh, what we like you've gone on to use those?
Yeah, with like
Alice,
Okay.
just start this end for now and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, for me, the him hands technique was really interesting because like a whole story can be told just by way you place your hands and how you do place your hands on another person. And that was something like I think a lot of our piece developed from initially.
yeah.
It's just that real simple movement.
Yeah. We also took a lot of inspiration from kind of Frantic Assembly's kind of grid method technique that they used in Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. We used that as our kind of start to the piece, and it was something that we kind of had an idea of when we first began the piece, and we knew we wanted to use that. So I think we were all kind of glad that we got to use it in the end.
And also we used DV8s, lifts and things like when we were doing, no, was it Frantic Assembly? Yeah, Frantic Assembly, sorry. When Sam and Kane did their fight scene, there was a lot of
It was kind of DV8.
That was DV8. It was to DV8 lifts and things like that. That we, from the beginning, we tested those. Remember, there was also the walk on the wall, which was Frantic
That was
Assembly.
Frantic Assembly, yeah.
So that was kind of like a mixed lesson, DV8 and Frantic, where we did lifting Sam and trying to walk on the wall and things like that. And then from that kind of branched into what we could use for the fight scene, what was safe to use, what we were able to do with the cast that we had, and they carried it out really safely. I think it went really well actually.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning as well, when we played around, like the others have mentioned, with like different companies' techniques, it made it easier for us to then develop into our pieces. But also with research, we watched like a few of DV8's actual like films that they had made, and apart from like the technical side of like their lifts and their like physicality and everything, we really got to understand how they process that story through the piece as well. We've watched like the few, I think it was it Enter Achilles and the Dead Dreams of Monochrome Men. Especially in the latter, you could see what they were trying to say in the story, but obviously it was broad enough in the sense of you could find your own story within it, and I think that helped when we were unsure of how we could tell our story and not make it so completely obvious of what was happening, because that wasn't what we wanted to do.
That's kind of like related as well what I was saying earlier with making it movement based gives the audience imaginative space. So that's what we found when we were watching DV8, because it was so movement based. We had our own creative space to think of what was happening in that situation. Even if we were told what was happening, there was still a lot of scenes and time where we could develop it ourselves.
And I think found such creative ways of how they had done it. With obviously like at Enter Achilles, it was so different in a sense, but intriguing, and you wanted to watch more, you wanted to see more, which is something I really wanted to kind of attempt with our piece as well.
Okay. All right, just move on now to your analysis of the audience engagement. What was their interaction? How did you gather feedback? What was that feedback? And did their feedback tell you if you met your sort of aims and objectives that you wanted to get across to them? I know you've touched on what the audience have said to you, but so their feedback and whether you hit the aims and objectives.
I think. Sorry. Yeah, go.
I think that way of just like asking them what they thought was really effective, because people can write things down for you, you can read it, but you can't really hear by the tone of their voice what they're saying. But hearing the feedback, I think we did like hit what we went out to get across.
So what sort of things did they say?
Well, we had two
And
performances.
I mean, obviously you went all in both performances, but you could mention both sets of
Well,
feedback.
it was quite cool actually. I think I would have preferred it to do it the way we did as well. We had two performances and we
Both
kind
slightly
of like
different.
both slightly different but both on the same story, and I found it really interesting how we did that. But anyway, go back to the feedback that we got given. For the first one we got given, they told us exactly what was going on, saying it was an abusive relationship, it was kind of like a love triangle, like the sexuality of Isaac, and they were able to say what was going on, but there's also little things that weren't in there that they had said, like in terms of what did Rail said, that you might be getting abused by your parents, when we hadn't put that in there, but we had that for Tom's character, but he obviously picked it up in the story, we like that. And then comparing that to the feedback we got given yesterday about the bigger piece was very much they could see the abusive relationship, and again we were able to incorporate that love triangle and things like that. So that feedback was very linked there.
Mm-hmm. But then it's obviously, like we mentioned before, with the people finding like the imaginative sense in it. Like I think Rail said the same thing, whereas in our form of the story, it was more my character felt negatively towards Chloe's about the whole thing with Sam's, but Rail saw it as, I think I wanted to help you.
Yeah, get out of
Get out of the
toxic
situation.
relationship.
That I can see that, and that's why my character was upset. So it's very interesting.
Because it's also really cool as well because he hadn't seen the scene that we'd done where your actual character was helping me get out of the toxic relationship. He hadn't seen that, and we didn't put that in yesterday's performance, and he said it. So it's kind of like cool.
Yeah, it was a good. It was kind of.
It was interesting to see how he picked up on that. Actually.
Yeah, it was good to see that you could kind of get that sense from just kind of brief interactions of our characters.
Yeah, what does that suggest to you that you've managed to do then, if somebody could pick that up?
I think the one thing that people typically always